Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you. The last... Thank you, Martin. Right, thank you for coming back. Last session of this morning, I'm introducing John Rigas, Chairman and CEO of Sciens Water, who's going to give us an investor's perspective for investing in water. You know, all the challenges that have been mentioned through the morning and how to tackle and solve them. So, John.
Thank you, Roberto. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. I am the CEO of Sciens Water, and as Roberto said, I am going to try to give you an investor's perspective. Okay, what does that mean? An investor invests money, is measured by the return on capital that they deliver, and so what you're going to hear from me is how we try to deliver a return on capital in investing in the water sector in the United States, where we invest. We have been in business for a long, long time, 31 years, but we only started looking at water in 2013. It took us 5 years to find our way to our first investment, but then at the same time we realized that it was such an incredible opportunity that we decided to go all in. So we sold everything else, and we went into the water sector. And we haven't regretted it, notwithstanding that it's a very peculiar sector in many ways, which I'm going to try to explain. Okay. There is a dialogue by Plato, written by Plato, called Ευθύδημος, and in that we have Socrates saying that isn't it paradoxical that people don't want to pay for water, which clearly is essential, okay, because you can't live without it, but they are very happy to pay for precious stones because they are scarce, okay? And that tells us one of the very basic truths about water, that although people realize it's essential and they need it to live, they don't want to pay for it. Okay, that's a start for a market. Adam Smith later took this paradox and named it the water diamond paradox, and eventually modern economists came up with a economic theory called the marginal utility concept. Okay, so marginal utility, what is that? If you buy a diamond, it has a value of X. If you buy a second diamond, I give you a second diamond, it has also a value of X, so you have 2X and 3X and so on and so forth. If I give you a glass of water when you are thirsty, that has a lot of value for you. If I give you a second one, you'll probably enjoy it a little bit. If I give you a third one, you got to run to the bathroom. Okay, so basically, that is another big issue with water, that we want enough of it, okay, of rain to have the water table replenished, the trees be green, but we don't want too much. We don't want a flood. So that's another peculiarity of our relationship with water, okay, that doesn't exist in other commodities. The other thing about water is that if you look at this chart, this is the chart of diamond prices. And as part of the water diamond paradox, before diamonds were scarce, we couldn't manufacture them. Now you can make them in the lab. So you see what happened to prices once you make diamonds in the lab. They collapse, prices collapse. Is that going to happen with water if we solve for the holy grail, which is desalination, and we can create water out of water in the oceans? No, prices are not going to collapse, and I'll explain to you why in a second. Okay, so we have a continuing problem to solve. We've had it since humanity started, okay, and it goes like this, okay? Water is a finite resource. 71% of the globe is covered by water. Of that, only 3% of the 71% is not saline, is fresh. But of that 3%, 99% is in the glaciers and permafrost. Okay? So we only have 1% or 3%, okay, to actually use. So all the stuff that we're talking about here this morning is 1% or 3%. Okay? And then you see the chart on the right. I hope it's big enough for you to see up there, but the population quadrupled in the last century and is expected to double this century. So 2 times 4 is 8. So that means in 200 years, the same water, the 1% of the 3%, has to be used by 8 times the people. Okay? So that's another fundamental problem about water. We have to use it many times over. Okay. In the US, okay, we have the same population, not the exact same population growth, but population growth nevertheless. And here's another perspective that I think is useful to keep in mind when you consider all these issues. Where is water used? Okay? So in the United States, we have crop irrigation, in other words, agriculture, representing 39%. That's a relatively low. Most countries are closer to 70, okay? But in the US, it's 39. You have, the second one is thermoelectric power. Remember that when we talk about data centers, is 36%. Okay, then you have the public, 14%, and you have other, okay, which is all industry, mining, etc. Water is the universal solvent, so it's used in everything, only at 11%. So you see how we use water on a big picture. Okay, this big picture will change once we have the full impact of the elbowing in by data centers that consume a lot of water, and I'll cover that in a little bit. But that's what it is now. Okay. How do we engage with all this? Okay. We engage through the hydrocarbon cycle. So our experience with water starts with collecting the water from the source. Water table could be a lake, could be a river, could be the water table underneath, could be a catchment area, could be a number of things. Then we treat it for use. We store it, if need be, before use, and then we use it. And as I said, everybody is a user. A household, a factory, a mining camp, a university, a hospital, everybody's a user. Okay. And then after the water has been used, we treat it again, and 2 things happen. Either we treat it for reuse on site, or we treat it for return to the environment pursuant to environmental protection laws. So theoretically, that's a cyclical action, okay, where you draw, you use, you treat, you put back, okay, in theory. Okay. In theory, it can be 100% cyclical, and it can be 100% environmentally friendly, but it's not, as we will see shortly. But before we go to that point, I want to highlight for everybody, because everybody's talking about infrastructure. So I want to show some pictures as to what water infrastructure is. Okay. So, okay, this is a good one. This is water infrastructure built by the Romans, a marvel of engineering, a marvel because it's over tens of miles. It is the absolutely right incline for the water to go down, not too fast, not too slow, okay, just the perfect speed, okay, and get from the source to, in this case, I guess, to Rome, and someone can have a spa in the bath there, because actually that was for wellness, believe it or not. And you might notice here an interesting, why is there 3 levels? It's to prohibit thieves, which are basically the farmers, from taking the water to use it for agriculture before it gets to the spa. That's a small point. But think of this as infrastructure, and you realize the IRR on this investment, if you own it, is infinite. Okay? You can't own it, but this particular one, but these types of investments have tremendously long lives, and they're fantastic to own that way. Okay, and then we go to other examples of this. You have the public baths, You have in the middle picture Singapore, arguably the best performing and best managed water utility in the world. But parenthesis, they have one advantage. It's a small networked market, and we'll come back to that. Then you have the Delta Works in Holland. That's the Dutch controlling the environment, basically, because they blocked the water from flooding them again, like after the war. You have the Hoover Dam, okay, which I'll cover it historically why it happened. And you have the Panama Canal, okay, which most people don't realize that the Panama Canal is run with fresh water. So the reason there was a problem recently was there was not enough fresh water, so they slowed down the passage of vessels. So you see here 5 examples of enormous infrastructure. This is typically constructed by governments, not by individuals or private companies, or if private companies are involved, they are involved under the guidance of and direction of government authorities and with the support of government authorities. And then you go to the other end, and you see the dichotomy here when we talk about infrastructure. So this is stuff that's in your home, in your farm, in your garden, in your basement, and it's also water infrastructure. And if this stuff doesn't work, just like the other stuff doesn't work, you're going to have poor quality of water, you're not going to have water, and all the other issues that that people complain about when the toilet is not flushing properly, et cetera, et cetera. So water infrastructure is vast, it's everywhere, and it touches pretty much everything that we do. And while we are doing all that everything, sorry, this is a complex slide, but it's on purpose complex, because I want to highlight the fact that solving for water is what in mathematics you would call a multivariate equation. It's an equation with many variables. What do I mean by that? Okay, when we engage with water, we do things to the water, okay? So we wash the dishes, the detergent goes down the drain. That means it goes to the water table. We take aspirin, the residuals go down the drain when we flush the toilet, okay? We build a dam, the beavers upstream complain, and downstream the farmers complain because the silt is not coming, because the speed at which the water of the river is moving has changed. That changes the fundamental ecosystem. Everybody's upset, okay, except the hydro company that gets electricity, okay, and maybe the city that gets the electricity. And there are many examples I can give you, but you get the idea. Everything that we do with water affects the water, changes its chemical composition, and at the end of the day, when you're trying to solve an equation, what do you start with? You start with, okay, what are the fixed and what are the unknowns? And you try to see what do I know that is fixed value so that I can solve for the unknowns. And in this instance, it's all self-reflective. So it's very difficult to solve as an equation. Okay, and that's what you've been hearing this morning. And I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. And here is how to make it simple, or not so simple. So any market, okay, of commodity market has pricing mechanisms and so on and so forth. It could be on an exchange, it can be through private dealing, it can be through any number of different mechanisms. Water doesn't, okay? Water is not a single market. And that's a real problem when you're an investor and you're trying to solve for infrastructure, you're trying to solve for all those things that were discussed this morning. So the first reason that water defies pricing is that some places have water, some don't. And if you want to transport water, the cost of transportation is higher than the value of the commodity, okay? So basically, you're losing when you transport. Think of that when we discuss conveyance infrastructure, which is a key part of providing a service as a utility. The second thing is that water is different everywhere. The chemical composition is different. So that's another reason it cannot be priced. And to the extent that we impact the chemical composition through our activities, as I previously said, you are accelerating that problem. The third, this is in the United States, because I'm talking about the United States here, the laws are all different. So if you are west of the Mississippi, think historically, go west, young man, and you can stake your ground, and you can own the water underneath your ground. With a little proviso, you can own it for original usage only, which is typically agriculture or grazing. Okay. If you are east of the Mississippi, the laws are riparian. They're based on English law, and they go back to William the Conqueror and eminent domain. And what that means is that if you need water, you need to be on the river. And if you are on the river, you are allowed to obtain river from the water. And how much do you obtain? That's based on what you can reasonably use. Okay, reasonably use. Who is going to determine what's reasonable? Nobody knows. Therefore, market chaos. Okay, so you look at these three issues, and these are issues that we contend with when we deal with water and try to price it, try to price the cost of water, try to create infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So, okay, let's see now at a price series. This goes back to Socrates, okay? So we're willing to pay, what is the green? Bundled cable, $217 a month, okay? But the average for wastewater, for sewer, so we don't get sick, is $64 a month, okay? And I bet you if you try to increase the 64, everybody's going to object, as the commissioner said. If you try to increase the 218, but you do some good marketing and you offer some more Netflix and whatever, people will pay through. Okay, so that's basically, these are real numbers. These are the prices in the United States. Okay, and look at it, if you look at it from a different perspective, okay, this is a different thing. And again, it was mentioned this morning. So here are each line item, it doesn't matter which cities they are, each line item is a different city in the US. And you can see on the left the variability of freshwater pricing, massive. It goes from 1 to 8, okay? And the variability of wastewater pricing, equally huge delta, okay? So then you say, how is it possible that some cities water is so expensive and some other cities not so expensive, and what goes into that? Because water is for free, right? So how can it be so expensive? Well, water, the commodity itself, you might think is for free, it's not. But when you think of when you are at your, in the bathroom and you turn on the tap and you have water, where did this come from? So you have a source, you have a conveyance mechanism, sometimes from very far away. Los Angeles gets a lot of its water from the Colorado River, okay? That's very far away, okay? Then you have a treatment facility to treat the water so that it's used properly and it's potable quality because it's an ingestible commodity. And then you have a conveyance at the micro level, the last mile to your home, okay? And then you have discharge, because unlike cable that stays somewhere up here, the water has to go, has to be discharged, has to be collected, has to be treated again to be returned to the environment. So if you think of that whole continuum, okay, you can understand why the pricing can be so variable. Because what's the quality of the water? Where is it coming from? What are the sources? What's the quality of the conveyance mechanism, the infrastructure? How well is it managed? Okay, which is a key issue in water management. Okay, how old, new, have they been investing? Have they not been investing? And so on and so forth. So even though water is perceived to be for free, it's not for free because of all these considerations here. Then we go to another point that makes our life difficult, that in the United States, and this is a key issue that's different between large countries and smaller countries. And in the case of the United States, which is a federal union, and it's a continent, it's not just a country, it's enormous, okay, it's super aggravated. But we have, fragmentation at many different levels. The first level, the obvious one, is geography. Some places have water, some don't. So if you're in the Mississippi, you have a lot of water. If you're in Arizona, you have no water. Okay, so the solutions are different in each case. The second thing is laws by state. I mentioned before the Go West Young Man and the riparian. I'll give you another example. In the United States, all the states have different laws. And in some states, you can put a tank at the top of your building and collect the water, and it's yours. You can use it. In some other states, you can put a tank at the top of your building, you can collect the water, but it belongs to the state. Okay? And in some of those states that it belongs to the states, they have no idea how to tell you how to convey it to them. So go figure. Regulatory environment. The regulatory environment in the United States is interesting, to say the least, with no offense to the regulators. They're trying to do their best job. But the fact is we are the only OECD country without a federal regulator. We will never have one because anything that has to do with water, it's in state law. The only exception for that is the EPA, which came late in the history of the United States in 1960s, and it regulates for quality of water. But quality of service and price is at the local level. So again, huge variability of practice. That is my point, that practices are different from state to state. And then you have a plethora of utilities. We have 88,000 utilities, some of them very small, as we've heard this morning. And we have corporate fragmentation for some reason, because of the regionality of the companies and the activities. The U.S. market is, although very mature in terms of M&A, mergers and acquisitions and consolidation, the water sector has not consolidated. So even with in the large subsectors in the water sector, you still have the top 3 or 4 companies. Instead of owning 85% like they do in all other markets, they own 15%. It's the inverse. So you have a lot of small companies out there that may be doing something very well, but they're small and cannot provide national solutions. Okay. So then we have the government and the U.S. Corps of Engineers, which does a study of our water utilities in the aggregate in the United States. They give a D plus for treatment and D for freshwater. And this is really bad. And you can see some of the statistics up there. I don't need to read them, but there are many thousands of high hazard dams and plants that are functioning, 2,400 plants, treatment plants that are functioning way above their capacity, which means that when it rains, it spills over and it spills into the streets. So you have consent decrees, EPA, et cetera, and you see 43 million Americans don't have proper water. It's horrible. Okay, the statistics in the aggregate are horrible. And I don't want to be sensationalist, but here's what that horrible means. Okay, this is the pipeline system of Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, one of the oldest cities in the United States. This particular one was built in the Civil War. Philadelphia loses 50% of its water. That's a very interesting accomplishment because in the European Union, loss from leakage and theft is 15%. In the United States as a whole is about 30%. Philadelphia is at 50%. I don't want to say anything too bad because the city employees of Philadelphia state system is actually an investor in our fund, so we have to be very proper. But the fact is, these pipes were built during the Civil War. I have no clue why they didn't use ceramics, because ceramics is an ancient technique that conveys water a lot better. They used wood. And by the way, you're not going to fix this with AI, just to be clear. Okay? All right. So where are we from a historical perspective? It's important to remember that the big water investments happen when there is political will, the capital, the organization, and typically a crisis. Okay, they happen after the crisis, especially in the modern world where you have conflicting interests with city planning, environmentalists, and all other interests. So going back to, it was mentioned before about the sewers in London. Okay, the sewers in London were built in the, from 1850 to 1890, same thing in Boston, same thing in New York, reduced waterborne disease massively, and we had the advent of chlorination. That first period, okay, of sewer building ended pretty much with the Hoover Dam. We had in the United States, we had the Great Crash, or yes, the Great Crash, and they needed shovel-ready jobs. So they had the brilliant idea of building tens of thousands of dams, which was brilliant because that's how United States generated the power to win World War II. That's a different thing, but obviously had some environmental impact. Okay, so that was your first. So some of the infrastructure that we have is still from then. Okay, then you have the 60s period, where for the first time the U.S. started treating effluent from discharge effluent from manufacturing and so on and so forth. Before, it was all raw sewage in the Hudson River next to where I live, and we're still suffering the benefits or detriments of that. But that was when the EPA was founded, the Clean Water Act, the first Clean Water Act, and it was revised later, and so on and so forth. A huge improvement, but as a result of crisis. Then you had a period of not paying attention to water because we were building other things and creating other things. In the Obama administration, there was a revision of the U.S. Federal Clean Water Act, and it was a good one, actually a masterpiece from an environmental standpoint, because remember, the United States is a whole continent, so if you're going to tell people what's the quality of the water that they need to discharge and return to the environment in the Hudson River, it's very different than, let's say, a stream in Montana where the salmon swim upstream. So all that is encapsulated in that. It's an incredible act of legislation. Which brings us to today. Okay, today we're at an interesting crossroads. There is, especially after COVID, there is a lot of sensitivity as to quality of water as with the air. And I think everybody has come to the realization that we need to do intensive recycling because of what I was mentioning before, 8 times the population. That means every drop of water has to be used 8 times before it's returned to the environment. So I can give a lot of analogies and so on and so forth. And of course, we have now AI and data centers coming in. So they're going to try to elbow their way into getting water to operate their data centers. So it's going to be an interesting social dialogue. But they have money and they are inventive. So we're going to see a lot of developments. The good news is that in the United States, the battle for the consumer's mind has been won. And you can see the graph on the left, which shows the growth in GDP. That's the blue line, has been growing a lot, obviously. And then you see water withdrawals, the orange line, which went up, had a plateau for several decades. People became educated about not wasting water and so on and so forth. And industry became better at managing water. And now you can see that we're getting better and better. But the challenge is still enormous because, and here's where a huge opportunity is in the US for investing, because if you look at the right, on the graph on the right, you'll see that Singapore recycles 100% of their treated water. So here I need to make a distinction. There is treated water, what do we treat, and how much do we reuse? So they reuse they treat 100% and reuse 100%. Okay. Then you have other countries like Israel, Europe as a whole. They recycle a lot of their treated water because usually they happen together, recycling and reuse. Okay. But in the United States, we're only at 12%. Okay, below the global average. Okay, and way below the other OECD countries. So that's bad, but it's also a major, major opportunity. And here's where we are today with what's happening. Okay, that as you've been hearing all morning, the demand drivers for water infrastructure are monumental. Everybody needs water infrastructure. Okay, and the numbers are also monumental. Okay, and the gaps are huge. And as you can see in the graph on the lower left, the middle column, 26% of all systems are in violation. Okay, 5 cities, 21 violations, but these are violations. Okay, and these are systems that cannot stop operating. Okay, they need to operate because you need water in your homes. So huge, huge numbers needed. The good news is that in the last 6 years, that's 100% coincidental with the launch of our fund, by the way, which we don't take credit for, but you can see that in the 15 years before that, spending for freshwater treatment and wastewater treatment was flat, okay? And then, and I remember answering questions from investors, well, why now? Why is that gonna happen now? Why? And okay, it happened. And you've seen here that we've had increases of 170, 180% in the spending of for treatment in the United States. That's a major breakout. Anybody who is a financial analyst will tell you that that kind of pattern is a breakout pattern. And we were also talking about technology before, so let me give you a little bit of a perspective on technology. So the water industry has a monumental inertia against anything new, any innovation, anything. Why? Because water is an ingestible commodity. And we keep saying that, but what that means is that if you make a mistake and someone dies, example, Flint, Michigan, what happens is you go to jail. So what also happens then is that you don't make changes because you don't fix what ain't broken. And water infrastructure, plant and infrastructure has an equipment, has a one attribute that's highly, highly attractive, that once you put it in place, like that aqueduct by the Romans, it works, and it works forever until it doesn't work, okay? So basically, you have every reason not to maintain, not to spend money, not to change things, not to accept new technologies, and so on and so forth. Having said that, I can tell you that we are witnessing a change in that mentality, and you can see the spending on technology for water systems. Now, I want to make another point here, which I forgot to make before. Because of the geographical distribution and the non-connected nature of water utilities, you cannot have a network approach. You all know what the network approach is, like the Google search engine is a network, okay? The telephone company is a network. The bigger it becomes, the more people use it, then everybody uses it, okay? So with water, you can't do that, okay? Because of the geographic, because of the conveyance cost, the distance, etc., you cannot have a network solution for water. So we're not gonna have a Google of water, okay? What we're gonna have is small progress. Okay, this, I hope I don't offend anybody, but we had a company that we sold that was making sensors. Some of those sensors would go into septic tanks. The septic tanks belonged to homes or were part of homes in Florida where there was a large immigrant, non-legal population without papers. And so when the septic tank was full, and they were supposed to call the utility company to come and clean it up, they wouldn't because they were afraid that someone at the utility company might ask them, well, what's your social security number, what's your residence number, whatever, residence ID, and they didn't have that, they wouldn't have that, so they were afraid to go. So the septic tanks overflowed, okay? Okay, there is a simple technical solution, technology solution. Put in a sensor that knows how full the septic tank is, that let the utility company know by automatically. You don't need to have anybody call you, okay? Simple solutions like that make a monumental difference. Another one like that is smart meters. You can see on the lower right that smart meter penetration, water meter penetration in the United States is extremely low. It's in the mid-20s, whereas smart electric meters is close to 90. So what this means is that if you are in a municipal system that has archaic archaic infrastructure. And if Nick has a pool and Mary doesn't, they both get the same invoice sometimes. So what's the economic and social equity in that? It's like completely inequitable. So these things can be fixed. Okay, technology is coming in, small strides, but important ones. Now, from an investor's perspective, again, people say, well, how do you make money with all this? Okay, because the industry is so large and so fragmented and so opaque, you have to dig in. That's why we said to ourselves, listen, if we're going to do this, we're going to do only this. We don't have time for anything else. You got to go all in. Okay, you have to do your own research. You have to develop your own investment insights and then act on them. But if you do that, the industry will offer you very good returns. And I can tell you, again, that on the lower right, this is a bit somewhat technical for some of you, but we have been able to deploy more than 1 billion of equity capital commitments at 6.5 times EBITDA, which is a very low number when the industry is at 14 and 15. Okay, so basically, because we're buying broken systems, we're going to fix them. We're buying inefficient systems. We find inefficiencies in the market that allows us to make acquisitions. Okay, we can buy at very, very, very good price. Same thing with putting new de novo infrastructure, because de novo infrastructure, and infrastructure, by the way, doesn't have to be the Roman aqueduct. The meters are infrastructure, the smart meters, okay? So you go into a municipality, you tell them, hey, listen, you don't have meters, you need to have meters. On average, you're gonna get 25% more revenue because the meters allow you to invoice properly and not waste your water. Plus, you can monitor losses along the way, but that's a different point. And we go to them and we say, okay, you pay us 8, 9, 10%, depending on your credit, for the next 28 years while those meters last. And for them, it's fantastic because they make a big margin on top of that. They make more money than we do, but we have a cash flow for 28 years. So we have a little bit of that Roman aqueduct for 28 years. Those are the opportunities. Then, again, this is even more technical. I'm going to just say one word, that if you are able to acquire those assets, you will get the return, and you'll get a very good return, because the moment you have scaled assets in the water sector, which is considered uninvestable in the US, the moment you have that, there are going to be a lot of buyers, whether they're pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, large strategics, you name it. Everybody's in the game. We sold some companies this year. We had in the one auction, we had 60 buyers, and in the other one, we had 50. Okay, so that tells you something. So that's very good, because if we are successful, the industry that invests in water, you're successful in investing and generating returns, that will solve the problem of money, because money has a price, and in order to come in and invest, it has to see that it can make a return. So if we're making returns, that's very good. And one last thing on the investment, and then I'll move on. There's one attribute of water investments that is highly, highly attractive, and that is the Roman aqueduct. The fact that plant and equipment, once it's put in place, lasts for a very long time. Accounting rules in the United States stipulate that you need to get paid for depreciation over 30 years. So if the thing lasts 50 years, not 2,000, but let's say 50 years, that means I have 20 years of depreciation in my pocket, cash in my pocket. That's huge. I don't know any other investment category that offers that. Together with water being an essential good, completely not discretionary. It's part of the 4 invoices that you pay every month for sure. Electricity, power generation, water, food, and shelter. Without those, you cannot live. Water is one of them. There is no commodity price risk, which is the inverse of what I was saying before, that there is no price on water, but there is no commodity price risk, and there's no substitution risk. Water is the universal solvent. A lot of people have tried to substitute it. They've failed. Okay, so basically, a super, super attractive category to bring money in, because it's when you elevate all those attributes to the portfolio level, talking about portfolio theory, it's the classic non-correlated investment. It's what everybody's looking for, to have investments that are non-correlated with their other investments, So if the stock market is going down, the bond market is going down, the crypto market is disappearing or whatever, you still get paid your cash flows on what your water investments are going to do really, really well. Looking at all that, we have narrowed our focus to 4 categories, which we think are critical. Water and wastewater utilities, the transmission and distribution system, that's the pipeline system. The pipeline system in the United States is probably the biggest infrastructure we have. Nobody knows how big it is, probably between 1.3 million and 1.6 million miles. That goes to the moon and back 3 times. Zillions of problems, you've heard it all this morning. And AI might be helpful a little bit there in terms of mapping the thing, because in addition to the silver-haired people leaving the industry, what they're taking with them is all the knowledge of how everything was built, because there are no papers, and many utilities don't have papers of how their systems work, and yet all that has to be recreated. So very interesting. Then recycling, reuse, and treatment. I spoke about that. This is going to be a massive opportunity in the United States for decades, as we catch up from the 12% to the other OECD countries. And then finally, digital water management, and water management, which is the most important thing, because as you probably heard from all the people this morning and from me, they understood that managing the water resource is the most important impact that we can have in improving our situation. So how do we do it? Very simple framework. We try to find a company that, because of all this multitude of small companies all over the US, we try to find a company that solves a problem and makes money. Honest to God, we don't want subsidies, we don't want investment tax credits, we don't want political patronage. What we want is a company that makes money. And if we find that company, we will buy it, we will support it with investment, with capital, with helping them develop a strategy and try to make a national player out of it. Here's an example of a problem solved. This is CSWR. So CSWR buys small-scale utilities. As Aaron said, those small-scale utilities can be anywhere from, okay, he gave an example of 5 people, but let's say 500 to 10,000. Just to make clear, we have no confusion with Thames Water or anything. What we are defining as a utility here is a well house. Okay, you can see how it looked before on the left. A storage tank, and the pipes that go in and out of the home, and then you have the sewage lagoon, which is a small, simple treatment facility for residential wastewater that is generally very benign when it gets discharged. This particular one, as you can see, had collapsed into the creek, which is not a very good idea for the regulator to actually know this, and from a practices standpoint. So CSWR finds these utilities small, broken, defunct, non-performing, underperforming, underfunded, whatever it is that is the inefficiency. These utilities fixes them and operates them properly. It's a company that has brought more systems in the history of the United States into compliance, in the whole history of the United States. So it's a tremendous company, and it solves a real problem. I call it the Flint, Michigan problem. What we do is, as I was saying before, we try to find these companies. I mean, this is a difficult slide, but basically we try to add what they need to have to be great again, or be great for the first time. That means capital, that means development of strategy, that means support, managerial resources, you name it. Everything that they need for a company to actually become a leader in its industry, which CSWR, I'm pleased to say, from a standing start on, I think it was November 18, 7 years ago, it's now the 6th largest pure play water utility in the United States, which is a phenomenal achievement for its management team. And you can see on the next slide, its reach now, it's in 11 states. And in many of those states, it's the preferred partner in quotes for the regulator to acquire and refurbish and bring into compliance small-scale utilities that are underperforming, the communities are suffering, and from any number of issues, health, economic, etc., and CSWR fixes that. So not only does it have an incredible purpose, and it fixes an enormous problem, okay, but also makes a competitive return, because remember, we are investors, so when we ask investors to give us money, we have to show them that we're going to give them a return that's competitive with investing in data centers and AI and all that stuff. So it's a tough ask, but that's the reality of bringing capital into the water business. Then there is the element of impact. Investing in water has a monumental impact. We, as a fund, decided from the beginning to be an impact fund. What that means is that we impose mandatory KPIs on our companies to comply with, and they report those to us, and we audit them at the end of the year, and we report the impact to our investors, who then presumably report to their constituencies. What is the impact? The impact can be, first of all, health. Okay, in the United States, we have had in the last decade, an uptick in the waterborne disease trends. After 200 years of coming down, they suddenly ticked up. Okay, that's because of poor wastewater practices. And if you can help fix that, you are reversing that trend and making it go in the right direction again. You can have impact on the environment, because if you return to the environment water that is properly treated and not full of chemicals and whatever else we've used, then you are protecting that water for the next user. And remember, it's cyclical, so the next user is you, okay, because it's regional also and local, okay? And so you're protecting it for yourself. And then other impact can be rise in, well, economic impact, jobs, obviously, the impact of on residential real estate of communities, and a general wellness impact. Aaron didn't give the example, but there are examples of communities where they have brown water coming out of the tap. CSWR goes in, fixes that, and then they have to pay 3 times as much for the water. So then that's initially a shock, but then they calculate, okay, I'm paying 3 times as much for the water, but now I don't have to go to the laundrette in town. I don't have to pay for the gas. I don't have to pay the laundrette to do my laundry. Okay, and I can take a shower and do the laundry at the same time, because it's a proper system working properly. So in the end, they prefer it that way as opposed to the other way around, because they realize that they have to pay for the conveyance system that brings water and makes it available for you and free, so to speak. Okay, and then I'm going to close with one last theme, and that last theme is data centers. Everybody's talking about data centers. I haven't spoken to an institutional investor who didn't tell me that they are overweight on data centers. And the latest question is, where are they all going to sell when they need to exit their investments? And nobody knows. But here we're going to talk about data centers and water. You can see a little slide that comes from the US government and shows us what the expectation is for water usage because of AI. And let me explain this to you. The difficult slide, but there's one point. Everybody thinks it's cooling. It's not cooling. Cooling is between 8 and 12%, okay, of water consumption by a data center. Okay, and it's not going to be replaced, and it's actually very, very heavy use on the water, simply because the chemicals used to do the cooling are very impactful, and they're not, in some cases, they're not 100% treatable. That's a different story, but it's 12%, 8 to 12%. So the other 88 to 92% is energy. Okay, data centers need a lot of electricity to work. And at the moment, this is the statistic currently, yeah? So the statistic currently is that of the water usage that data centers require, this percentage, this very high percentage, goes to the water usage by the power plants that generate the electricity for the data centers So as you can see, it's monumental. As you'll see on the next slide, it's happening in a lot of the challenged areas for water in the United States. And what this is going to do is it's going to have an impact on social relationships between communities, because now you have yet another participant who is asking to use water. And we all know what when there is a closed circle and someone starts to elbow in, and these guys are big guys and they have a lot of money, a lot of political power, and they have the narrative that we got to defeat the enemies on AI and this and that and the other. And I don't disagree with the narrative, or recognizing the narrative, but the fact is they have every reason to be able to ask forcefully to have water, which means that we have to use water many more times, or we have to somebody else cannot have water. Both of those will happen, and there are instances of communities in Western Virginia and other places where people actually now don't have water because the data center. This is a very simplistic statement, but let's say on a relative basis have less water because of the existence of a data center very nearby, and the water is of lesser quality as well. So this is a social dialogue that is going to be happening for a long time, as long as we're building up for data centers. An example of that is the one that I have here. This is a city called the Dalles, Oregon. So this is a city that where Google had built a data center a long time ago, one of their first data centers. And basically, they had the city politicians and administrators had been blamed of giving too good a deal to Google. Then they turned on Google and they started auditing how are you using the water and so on and so forth. Google, of course, didn't want to give this information, so there was a big mess. You can look it all up on AI, on the internet. And maybe this is a sign of good things to come. They came to a settlement where, in order for more water, which is interesting, Google agreed to build out $28 million, $20.5 million of infrastructure that belongs to the city, okay, and will belong to the city, but Google will have additional water rights because they're building yet another very big data center at the city. So at the moment, everybody is happy. We will see how this evolves. But when you go back and you think of the things that I mentioned before, in terms of the price of water, that is really the cost of conveyance and infrastructure and so on and so forth, you see here an example at a community where basically the price of water is, let's say, indirectly reached at through a private negotiation, not about the water itself, but about how do we treat the water, convey the water, and so on and so forth, which is the story of investing in water. My hope is that with everything that's happening, and we'll certainly do our best to push the world in that direction, that we will go to more closer to, and I think we're getting a little bit closer to getting into the virtuous cycle. The virtuous cycle is that we need to organize, and this is the US, organize, it's different here, and rationalize the water industry. It's important to have price discovery, which is very difficult, as you've heard me say, in water, because it's indirect, it's not direct on the commodity. Price discovery allows institutional capital to come in. Institutional capital can make a difference because it allows for infrastructure to be updated. It allows for new technologies to be introduced into the infrastructure base, okay? And to try new technologies, certainly because of the inertia that exists of resisting new technologies, but If you have new people, new minds, institutional investors, they tend to try things and see if they work, which then gives a boost to the role of the academics and the universities to generate new knowledge, new IP that then can be used on a VC basis again and be tried. And with that, hopefully, we have increased results, positive results. And with those positive results, we give a renewed mandate to our regulators to increase standards so that when we treat water and we engage with water, we actually respect it and protect it for the next person who could very well be us, okay, because water doesn't move around. And hopefully that cycle builds on itself. And with that, I thank you very much for listening to me.